Welcome into a live edition of Inside Carolina Football Roundtable. I'm your host, Tommy Ashley. We're sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt, JohnnyT-Shirt.com. Spent a little time getting this great graphic done for you guys. And there's a blank space over there. Taylor Vippolis, I believe, is planning his trip to D.C. to cover the ACC tournament. So if he comes, we'll put him there. If not, I've got Buck Sanders, Greg Barnes, and Jason Staples. I will not stay in this middle spot. This spot goes for the speaker. But we're going to get started. We promised you guys a post-mortem of last season and a look ahead to spring ball. Well, here we are. In the heart of ACC tournament, we're talking North Carolina football. Buck, I'm going to come to you first. Last season, a lot of people were disappointed. A lot of similarities in the past. And hold on, Buck. Look here.
Oh, no, it's not.
Taylor Vippolis has shown up. So, Taylor, point for the season, point for this season, point for next season, starting with Buck. Buck, get in here.
I thought you were going to make Taylor go first since he got here late.
Well, he's getting here. He doesn't have the disco balls going yet, but it's live radio, so we have fun with it. Buck, I want you to start us off. I'm going to move you to the center, and I want you to tell us about what stuck out for you last season with North Carolina's 2023 success or failure.
The thing that stuck out to me from last season is how much different we would have all considered the season as a whole if Mack Brown and North Carolina did not repeat their usual habit of blowing bunnies during the season. They lost to Virginia and they lost to Georgia Tech, and they shouldn't have lost either of those games. If you look at what any book of statistics tells you about Georgia Tech and Virginia last year, North Carolina should have easily beaten both of those teams. And if they had, what would their record been, Tommy?
10-2.
10-2.
Yep.
And would that feel a lot different, even if you tack the NC State loss, as embarrassing as that was, onto the table, and even accounting for that, if North Carolina had gone 10-2, this would be in a completely different season, and all that would have had to transpire to get there was to beat two teams you should have easily beaten. So that's my takeaway from the first part of the season.
Greg, I'll get you in here next. Slide you to the middle. This is fun. I'll figure out a way to mess it up. But Greg, North Carolina, to Buck's point, North Carolina left a lot of meat on the bone again. You've talked about it, how they've done it. But what stuck out to you last year to maybe halt the momentum or slow the momentum or put the car in reverse for Carolina football?
Tommy, I've actually got two things, so I'm not going to – I need to pick one of the two here, and I can't decide which one's better. So I'm going to go a little bit obscure, and then if Jason or Taylor don't hit on the other point, I'll circle back.
Well, do I need to start and I've got a clock. Do I need to start it?
If you want to start it, you can start it. I'll be precise with this first part there.
Greg Barnes agrees to be the first to be timed on the Inside Carolina Roundtable.
What's my time limit here? 2 minutes? Wow, that's tight. Okay, let's go. Let's do it.
Hit it.
The talking point last season coming in was Chip Lindsey was going to institute more of a run offense to complement what Drake Maye did, so we don't see so much of what we saw in previous years with Sam Howell and Drake Maye having to do so much for the offense. When you have the emergence of Omarion Hampton as one of the top running backs in the country, he actually led the nation, was tied for the lead, I guess, entering the last week of the season. You felt like, okay, this is kind of what they need, and it can correct some of the issues. But when we start looking about how this team executed in the red zone, which has kind of been a sticking point, for Phil Longo for a number of years. But we thought Chip Lindsey focusing on the run game would really make provide dividends there. And as we look at the numbers, it really wasn't the case. Despite having Omarion Hampton and more of a running attack, North Carolina last year averaged 61% in terms of red zone touchdowns. That is actually below 2022. That year averaged 62.86. Of course, if you go back to the great year in 2020, that was an elite offense for North Carolina. They averaged 73% red zone touchdown percentage. And I know Connor Harrell got a little banged up in the bowl game, but I really thought that was an opportunity to show more of a dynamic offense since you didn't have Drake Maye. We didn't really see that. So I think that was a little bit of a letdown for me, is that the offense couldn't carry the team as well as it had in the past. And I think they sputtered a bit down the stretch. Defense, we know what they were, but I thought the offense could have been much better, especially in the red zone.
Wow.
That is a professional. And I had no idea what was going to happen when it hit 0.
That's tough. 2 minutes is tight. Good luck, Jason.
Question in the comments. An egg timer or a timer, Doc just left a chat. Jason, get in here. I will bring you front and center. And Taylor, I'm holding you to the last. Last in, last to go. Jason, can I turn on the timer for you? Do you think we can make this happen?
Go for it. I'll be well under 2 minutes.
All right.
The main thing here for me, and again, I have two things as well, much like Greg did, but I'm gonna go with the first one, and then we'll see if anybody hits the second one before I come up. But this has been kind of a refrain for me for a while, and the thing that really is the big takeaway for me is line of scrimmage is really where things matter. And if you look at the failings of the team, last year's team had enough talent at the skill positions to be a 10-2 team, to be maybe an 11-1 team. But the problem is when it comes down to November, when it comes to playing against your top level teams, football is a game that's won on the line of scrimmage. And Carolina just flat out got pushed around too many times in their losses. I mean, and actually, I think the bowl game was a good illustration of that as well. That was where they didn't have some of the advantages that they've had in some of those other spots over the course of the year. And I thought West Virginia took it to the offensive line, and I thought the defensive line was, average at best in that. And I think overall, the last few years, they've recruited pretty well on the defensive line. But the returns to stars have not been there for the defensive line, and they've not been nearly as productive as what you would hope, and that's why there's been a change at that coaching spot. So to me, the real takeaway is looking at last year. You're coming off of Sam Howell and Drake Maye, and you don't have a conference title game to show for it. You don't have any of the hardware that you'd hope to have with that kind of guy. And it's all because of the line of scrimmage. And that goes to a lot of what Greg had to say in terms of what those limitations were and why they were there. So to me, it's all about getting better in the line of scrimmage moving forward.
Jason Staples and under. Yeah, to Buck's point, to Greg's point, to your point, it all comes back to that, I think. So Taylor, drag you in here into the hot seat, clear the shot clock. We don't restart it if the ball didn't hit the rim. Jason didn't hit the rim. I'm gonna restart it anyway. I'm gonna be ACC ref. Restart it. Tell me what you think. What was the letdown? What was the negative? What was the bad taste in your mouth about last year, and why?
Yeah, my biggest takeaway from last year watching Carolina football, I think it would be the moving of the goalposts from the coaching staff, where you start the season and everybody's saying that, 7-8 wins isn't enough. And then by the end of the season and the team is kind of dragging to the finish line, you get the 7-8 wins. It's pretty good around here, and not something that really happens that often. And you look at the talent on this team. You have Cedric Gray at linebacker, Drake Maye at quarterback, Tez Walker. You have the best running back in the conference in Omarion Hampton. And it just feels like if you can't win the double-digit season with somebody like Drake Maye, with somebody who's a consensus top 5 pick, and you're sputtering, and not only are you not finishing to end a season, you're getting embarrassed by your biggest rival and getting dragged up and down the field by NC State. And I think that moving of the goalposts when the whole thing was about raising the expectations for the program is why you've seen a lot of apathy set in with this fan base to be like, if we're a team that falters every year going down the stretch, and our coach is saying like, hey, we should be, not satisfied with 7-8 wins, but being like, this is not something that happens all too often, then like as a fan base, what do you have to get excited about? And that kind of sat in for me when you're watching the bowl game against West Virginia in North Carolina's backyard in Charlotte. And it looked like a West Virginia home game, and like North Carolina fans couldn't really be bothered to go to it.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there, and it's a great analogy, is to moving the goalposts. All 8-win seasons are not the same. And Buck, I want to get you back in because you and I have talked about it forever. When did I meet you at Old Spinnakers at the mall that day? 24 years ago.
What is Spinnakers, for those that don't know?
It's a restaurant.
It's an old mall restaurant. Come on, man. Kind of like Ruby Tuesdays. Oh, they're mostly
It's a chain.
gone too.
The predecessor to like TGI Fridays.
Yeah, it was much better than that stuff. But it was a classic meeting between Buck Sanders, J.B. Sissel, and myself to discuss the future of Inside Carolina 24 years ago. And wow, what has happened since then? A lot of good. But North Carolina, Buck, still an 8-win program. And that was my takeaway from thinking about listening to you guys talk. Give us something more here on last season. It's amazing what a timer does. I mean, we're just 12 minutes in. We've gone through 5 people. So, Buck, hit us up.
Well, I can remember during that conversation and many points since then, in fact, and I know how people have reacted to Mack Brown's statement about 8-4. You could run the clock on me too, Tommy. You don't have to hold back on me. You can let it go.
I try to protect us guys.
You have said multiple times over the years, this is an 8-4 program. It's an 8-win program, 9-win program. You said it 1,000 times more than Mack Brown ever thought about saying it. So it does hit different when that 8 wins comes during, as Taylor pointed out, the Drake Maye sort of tidal wave that lifted the quarterback position to North Carolina where it was. And, the recruiting that had taken place and all the things that had gone into making the program turn the corner after the Larry Fedora years. It's hard to take 8-4 in that situation. It's just a difficult thing to accept, and everybody understands that. The other thing I would say, and this will probably also play into something that Taylor Vippolis would repeat, is the thing that I never understood was what happened to the defensive play calling after the South Carolina game. I mean, I know that South Carolina did not have a great offensive line. A lot of teams did not have a great offensive line that North Carolina played last year, and they didn't get anywhere close to the same results. So I just don't understand really what happened there. I wish I did. That would be a nice little couple of months worth of columns for me if I could point that out. But that's something that I just will never understand about last season.
Jason, I have a question for you and Greg and everybody, I guess. But we talk about how all 8-4 seasons aren't created equal, and North Carolina has a quarterback like Drake Maye, and I think it's fair for the fan base and for the team to kind of raise expectations. How many teams do you think you could put Drake Maye on in college football, and then that team becomes a college football playoff contender, not a national champion off the bat, but at least in the conversation of being a playoff team, because it feels like outside of the first 6 weeks, Carolina really wasn't there. And when they're falling and losing as bad as they kind of did at the end of last year, it became pretty obvious that this team was a lot closer to a 500 team than they ever were to a legit playoff team.
That's a really good question. I think I see 9 teams from last year that I might favor to win the national title if Drake Maye is their quarterback. So going through it, if you put Drake Maye on Michigan, Washington, Texas, Georgia, Alabama, Oregon, Florida State, Ohio State, and Penn State, I think every one of those teams makes the playoff, and I might favor every one of those teams to win the national title if Drake Maye's on that team.
That's so is that an indictment or is that a laud for Drake?
I think it's more of a loud for Drake, but it also is a bit of an indictment in terms of where the program is. That if you can't even be in the picture for the playoff in the last month of the season, if you're losing by 19 points to your rival that doesn't have anybody like that, then that's an indictment on your team. You can't have that. That's when you have that kind of generational player, or at least a top 5 pick. If you don't want to call him a generational player, that's fine. I think he is along those lines. But you're looking at a potential NFL franchise quarterback, and if you can't do better than 8-4, then that says kind of where your ceiling is for your program at that time. And that means that you had some serious problems elsewhere. And I'm watching some of the guys from the punditry that are talking about how you take Drake Maye off of where some folks out there talking about Drake Maye should be the 6th or 7th ranked quarterback in the draft or whatever. I think those folks are nuts. But I've seen some other folks that have responded to them saying, look, if you watch Drake's film carefully, he's doing so much because he's got to. And there's so many limitations around him. And that North Carolina team, I've seen a couple people say that North Carolina team might be a 4-win team without him, maybe a 5-win team. And that might be true. So, that, and it depends on who you replace him with at that point on last year's team. But when you're hearing people say that sort of thing, that is something that you have to take seriously. And it's a little bit of both indictment and lauding of the player.
Yeah. When you talk about putting Drake Maye on other teams and kind of where they're at, I think the biggest frustration is this is not like an Ole Miss team that has to go to Alabama and you're losing Alabama, you're losing to Georgia. We're talking about a North Carolina team that's losing to Georgia Tech. We're talking about a North Carolina team that loses to Virginia, Virginia's only win in conference. And I think that's where a lot of the frustration comes in for, because you could justify losing at Clemson. You could justify losing in Tallahassee to Florida State, or if Florida State comes to Chapel Hill. Carolina, year after year, is losing to a lot of the teams that you're penciling wins in the beginning of the season. And that's where I think the disconnect is coming, where it's like, you have Drake Maye. You should find a way to beat Virginia.
No question. Greg.
And you shouldn't be giving up 42 points to Georgia Tech. Or 45 or whatever it was.
And you were ahead, 21-7 or something to that effect. Greg, get in here and round out 2023 with your second point here, since we've got some time. I won't start the clock on you because you've already proven that you can game the clock and finish on time.
Well, to Taylor's point right there, North Carolina ranked 94th in strength of schedule, how Brian Fremeau does it at BCF. And that's basically, it's not your average team against that schedule. It's what an elite team would be. So basically a top 25 type program. How would they have fared, against North Carolina's schedule? And so that, in terms of difficulty, Carolina's was 94th. Whereas you start talking about, USC and Ole Miss. Ole Miss, for example, was number 6. So there is an opportunity there that was lost. And to build on Taylor's earlier point, when we start talking about 8-4, and Mack Brown has said, well, if we started with some losses and then finished strong, people would have a different idea, a different perspective. And that's true. But that kind of gets at the crux of the issue, is that North Carolina has been, Tommy, to your point, an 8-4 program historically. Mack Brown was not brought back to go 8-4. It was to elevate the program. And so when Matt comes in, automatically expectations are raised. And I'm sorry, but when you're a Hall of Fame coach who's won a national championship, that comes along with the territory. And everybody knows what he did at Texas, how much success he had. Is that fair when you compare it to historical expectations and successes of the program? Maybe not, but that's a different conversation. And I really think for North Carolina, what they have to improve on moving forward is closing out the season. And that's why nobody showed up in Charlotte for the West Virginia game. That's why so many people kind of have a negative mindset coming into the offseason. Because if you go back 2 years ago, Carolina lost 4 of their last 5 against FBS opponents. 2 years ago, they started 9-1, finished 9-5, lost 4 straight against FBS opponents. And then in 2023, they lost 5 of their last 6 against FBS opponents. And when we start looking at those scores, I mean, you lose to Virginia, give up 31. Lose to Georgia Tech, give up 46. You beat Duke, but you give up 45. Give up 31 to Clemson, 39 to NC State, which is crazy, and 30 to West Virginia. So in those games, in those final 6 FBS games, Carolina allowed 37 points per game. That's not going to get it done against the Power 5 schedule. And so what Mack Brown and his staff have to figure out this offseason and moving forward is, you want to start great, but you also have to finish solid. And I know the schedules have been crafted to give them a good start. And that's a good idea. You want to get the momentum rolling, but you've got to figure out, is it guys playing too many snaps? Is it not having enough depth? Whatever it may be, you have to solve what happens when you get to November, because that's when the good teams really step up. That's when you figure out, okay, this team legitimately has a chance at a conference title, and Carolina has not been able to surpass that hurdle the last couple of years.
There it is, folks. You wanted to know why we haven't done this postmortem until now. It's because it brings back a lot of rough memories. If you're in the YouTube chat right now, you see folks are saying, move on, move on, move on. Well, we're going to move on. First thing I'm going to do is talk about Johnny T-Shirt and JohnnyT-shirt.com and get the ball rolling there. Johnny T-Shirt on Franklin Street. Check out this shirt that they are selling. I know it's basketball related, but it was a great weekend for North Carolina athletics. And that better blue shirt that Johnny T-Shirt has on their shelves is certainly signifies part of that great weekend. Of course, they've got gear for every sport, every team, and tailgating, home gating, stickers, buttons, whatever you need at Johnny T-Shirt. And if you can't get to them on Franklin Street, go see them in person. Then they'll send it straight to your home at JohnnyT-shirt.com. And you get your 10% off your everyday order. Come back, National Guys. It's Football Roundtable in the heart of basketball season. Up next, springing forward into 2024. Okay, Buck, do you want to take this one first? Why
Up to you. Up to
I
you.
want you to take it first, and I'm not going to start the clock because we need a good Buck discussion here to get this train on the tracks. North Carolina opens spring, just so folks will know, today is March the 11th. Carolina has their press conference a week from now. Mack will sort of have his introductory spring press conference. And then on the 19th, Inside Carolina has access to practice at 8 o'clock in the morning at the indoor where North Carolina opens their 2024 spring season. But what do we need to be thinking about? What do we need to be looking for in your mind going in spring?
Well, I will tell you what has been on my mind for a while now, ever since I heard Jason Staples talking about North Carolina moving to preference for some sort of bully ball kind of offense. And that's intriguing to me in a lot of ways. And I think some people might look at that and think, oh, here we go with Carl Torbush and the Fatbacks of 1998, or the offensive coordinator back in those days said that North Carolina was going to impose their will on the opposition, which lasted until Miami of Ohio beat them at home, the first game of the season. So that's intriguing to me, the whole bully ball concept. I think it will be more of a mix. I don't think they're going to all of a sudden abandon the forward pass in the coming season. And so the design of the offense, I think, is a very curious thing, and I don't know how much we'll get to see of that this spring. I don't expect Chip Lindsey and everybody involved with the offense to just draw up a whiteboard with every play that North Carolina is going to run the following year and in what order they're going to run them. But I'm very interested in how that's going to play out. What's the difference going to be between the offenses that we saw under Sam Howell and Drake Maye and what we're going to see under Max Johnson or Connor Harrell? And we know they've got Omarion Hampton, and we know they've got a couple other guys that check in around 220, 225. So they've got some guys, some stout running backs. How are they going to use those running backs? What's all that going to look like? Chip Lindsey comes out of the Gus Malzahn kind of run first, legacy tree. What is all that going to look like this spring? That fascinates me, and I can't wait to see, if anything, if what they will show us this spring in that regard.
It's an interesting take there, Buck. Being the offense, something to look forward to. Taylor, I'm gonna get you in. Give me what you're looking at spring ball here. I mean, North Carolina, everybody's scared to death, to Buck's point, about what the offense is going to look like. Is that the most important thing for you? What you got?
I'm biased as a former receiver that my eyes always kind of go towards the wide receiver room. And for this North Carolina team, I think the thing I'll be keeping an eye on is replacing Tez Walker and being able to have a number one guy step up. Because when Tez Walker initially went down, there really wasn't a bona fide number one receiver on the roster without him. I think people thought it would be Nate McCollum. He struggled at times being able to stay on the field. And for this North Carolina team, for whoever is at quarterback, whether it's Max Johnson or Connor Harrell, they're going to need a number one guy who is a game changer. And I think you have some options, and North Carolina didn't go out in the transfer portal this season and kind of get that next Tez Walker, maybe because they have a lot of confidence in their guys. And also, I think it's worth noting that when you talk about the offense kind of falling off at the end of the year, you didn't have Kobe Paysour, and the offense did look pretty different when Paysour went out. So between Jones and McCollum and Paysour, you have the pieces there, and the tight ends at North Carolina are so good. Probably the strength of this offense outside of Omarion Hampton, that they can take pressure off the number one receiver, whoever the number one receiver is. But I do think for this offense to have a great deal of success, you need that 1,000+ yard guy to kind of emerge.
Jason, you're up here. North Carolina's 2024 season would be defined. Well, how will it be defined if you had to do that going into spring? What are you looking for first?
So, first of all, I'm also a former wide receiver, but the interesting thing is that unlike Taylor, that's not where my eye goes first. My eye, again, is going to go to the line of scrimmage. I want to see whether or not you're going to see an increased level of physicality on both lines of scrimmage. last year during the spring, we all saw it and during the fall some, we all saw that the offense was able to run the football pretty much when they wanted to on the defensive line. And, to some degree, the coaching staff kind of waved off concerns about that of like, well, we're not playing our first team linebackers right now and, all that much in there. And, a couple guys on the defensive line are banged up and they just kind of, waved it off. And then it turned out that the offensive line wasn't all that great either. And now they were still able to run the football pretty dang well last year with Omarion Hampton. But what I want to know is, are they going to have any sort of disruption from your front four? And, from that front six, really, where is this team going to create havoc? And is this team going to be able to generate havoc that it has not generated over the past few years? Because defensively, this has been a defense that has more or less allowed offenses to dictate to them over and over and over again. What I really am interested in is, and I think this is the key to the season for North Carolina next year, how quick do the returns happen with the coaching changes on defense? And is the defense going to be able to dictate to offenses in the next season? I mean, it may take a little while, and do they have the personnel to do what they want to do on that? But if they're able to cause problems, I think a good sign, honestly, in spring would be if the offense is starting to have some trouble. If I'm Mack Brown, I'm pleased if the defense is getting a lot of wins in spring, because I think you've got enough players that you feel like you're going to be able to generate some offense next year. But you want to see that defense really start to be able to generate havoc, and that's what I'm looking at. If they can't generate havoc on the defensive side next year, I don't think they're going to win eight games. So they're going to have to find ways to do it, and that starts in the front seven, and starts with some of the ability to get pressure from other positions. But that I'm looking at that front six.
Greg, you're up. We talk about Jason mentioned included linebackers there too. Carolina won't have Cedric Gray, who's played 3,000 snaps, it seems like, in his career, almost literally, and made nearly every tackle during the game as well. So it's not just that defensive line. But Greg, your take going into spring here?
Yeah, and I want to get both Jason and Taylor's opinion on my point here, but I agree with everything that's been said thus far. And I really think for North Carolina, the whole conversation we had last year with Chip Lindsey is like, yeah, they're going to be more of a run-based offense. That's going to be more of a focus. I haven't really seen the mentality shift. We've seen the scheme change a little bit, but I really expected the guys to have more urgency up front, more fire under Randy Clements. So maybe this is the spring to do that. I think there needs to be a mentality change. There needs to be an aggression on both sides of the ball, but really up front, and especially on defense. Mack Brown, we've talked about the Gene Chizik hire, and Mack really wanted to be aggressive to complement the offense. As everybody knows, when you have an explosive offense, it's not about being great defensively. It's about being opportunistic defensively and getting off the field and creating turnovers and getting the ball back to your offense. That's how you have a complementary set there. And that's what Max wanted. And then he brings in Gene Chizik, who that's not what he does. It's really not what he's ever done. And so even though last offseason the conversation was, well, we're going to be more aggressive, you got to have a guy in there that is an aggressive coach. And that's just not Gene. Geoff Collins, on the other hand, is. And so beyond the schematic issues and changes that have to take place this spring on both sides of the ball, I think there has to be a mental reset. I think it's a behavioral thing. And really with deep, I mean, look at it like this. Taylor and Jason know this better than anybody. But when you start trying to get faster, all right, we use track, for example. There's a couple ways to do it. You can just get out there and run and do more of what you have always done, or you can put a parachute behind you, right? That's going to make it tougher as you run down the track. But what you can also do is you can run a little bit downhill, which pushes you beyond what you typically run, and you get accustomed to that. We see that a lot in golf, right? You have the speed sticks. What are those? Well, you have one that's crazy light. So you swing faster than you would with a golf club in your hand. There's also a heavier one. And so what you're doing is you're tricking your mind, and you're making your mind adjust to something that you're not accustomed to. And I really believe that that's what we have to see. You have to shake these guys up, because the last 2 years, especially defensively, they've just kind of done what Gene Chizik wants them to do. And he may have schemed a little bit more aggressively, but it didn't really change the approach. And so I think Geoff Collins can bring that mindset. I think Randy Clements is known for having that type of mindset offensively. And I think you have to be able to win that point of attack. That has to do with talent. That has to do with scheme. But it has to begin with want to and desire and anger. And we just have not seen that. So the question to Jason and Taylor is more along the lines of, is that accurate? And how do you go about addressing that as a coach to get to your players to kind of get kids to understand the aggressiveness that you need?
I think it's for sure accurate, and it's one of the things where like the coaches can be preaching it to you all day, but after a certain point, like it kind of falls on the players for why people are questioning their toughness and their fight and a lack of aggression. I think one comparison I've kind of noticed with like the basketball team, for example, and all the success they're having. You watch the beginning of the NC State game, the past one in Chapel Hill, and it felt like a team kind of going through the motions and not really bringing the fire and matching the intensity that somebody like NC State was playing with. And then Elliot Cadeau kind of gets in that little scuffle with a player where he gets tangled up. You have some of his teammates backing him up, and that felt like the moment of the game where it kind of changed, and Carolina was like, you know what, we're in a fight right now. These people across from us don't like us, and we have to kind of raise that intensity. And then you fast forward to this Duke game when you know everything's at stake and everything that comes with playing in that rivalry game. And Carolina was doing all the little things. They were first on the floor. They were the ones essentially taking the fight to this Duke team. And I don't think it has anything to do with what Hubert Davis said before, but it was kind of the players realizing the situation that they're in and kind of taking it upon themselves. And it's something where you need that player leadership. And when it comes to that player leadership and that fight and that love for the game, that's really not something you could coach or something you could teach. It's something that you either have or you don't. And that's why when I look back at the 2015 team, Jeff Schottmer, Landon Turner, Marquise Williams, Mack Hollins, it's hard to pick who the most vocal leader was or who the guy was that everybody on the team was like, I will follow this guy through anything and be in any battle. And when I look at this North Carolina team, it really doesn't feel like they have that leadership and the accountability for each other to kind of hold each other to that standard, because you mentioned how poorly this team finishes every year, and it's become a trend at this point.
Jason, I want to get you in here on that real quick on it though, because we do have some questions in the chat and some questions on the board.
So how many fights were there in camp and in spring when you were on that 2015 team?
A good amount.
Yeah, see, that's the thing.
There's a lot of no love lost.
You know how many fights we've seen at open practices the last few years?
How many?
One that I remember, or in one, I wouldn't even call that a fight.
No, there was just a couple. Two guys took swats at each other. That was about it. But nothing. So, I come from a long line of coaches where there's a belief that you need to have a certain number of fights in your camp or in your spring every year that tell you you've got guys that are playing with that level, playing that much on the edge. And there's the old old saying that, you got to have at least a couple guys on your defense in particular, and ideally on your offensive line, that maybe aren't exactly the take them home to your parents kind of guy, at least when it comes to being around the football field. And, that's where the culture really, really starts. You have to have those guys who want to be that dude and who are that competitive and then raise everybody else's level. And if you're not going to fight like that with them, then they're going to fight you. And yeah, I think that's a huge part of this. It's what I've been harping on in terms of culture for a long time, about the kind of physicality and the kind of want to that you have to have in your program. And the thing is, that's the stuff that shows late in the season when guys are banged up and when guys are, playing a few extra reps. And, that was another thing that I brought in, to potentially talk about in this, is a combination of that and also just a matter of developing sufficient depth to be able to get a few extra guys out there to steal some reps who are actually eager to play and actually eager to play with that kind of fire. So, yeah, I think that's imperative. And I think without seeing some of that, without seeing that shift, it's hard to compete at this level. And you have to love ball, and you have to love the physicality. You have to love getting hit and being hit and hitting in order to really sustain the kind of level of play that you need to at this level.
And I have to be fair too, because you never want to ask people to do something that you wouldn't do. I wasn't a fighter on the football field. I was the fight would start and I was one of the last people there. Like
I wasn't
one
either,
of the people who's like trying to break it up at the very end, when I could clearly see I'm not in danger of taking a right hook from Travis Hughes or anybody like that.
Yeah, I wasn't either. I mean, the closest I came, I got into it with one guy on our defense at Florida State one time, really, where I got into it pretty good. That was about it. And the thing is, in hindsight, I should have been more of that. And the fact is, we had guys on those teams that were that dude, that were guys that were willing to mix it up a little bit more, and they made us better for it. So now the other thing is that it was not our place to be that guy on those teams either.
No, yeah.
We take a swing at the wrong guy, and that's another issue. But you have to play with that level of toughness where if somebody's going to step to you and take a swing on you, then you better be able to stand back and do that on the football field.
So Vip was the Angel Reese. The fight breaks out and limp off to the side, get out of the way.
And behind Mack Collins and just let him know if it got any further, I would have had his back, but it didn't.
I got you, man.
Yeah. Hold me back, guy. Or just go talk to the other walk-ons and just we're not getting in there.
So they don't pay me enough to get in that one. Buck, I'm gonna bring you in
not
for
paying me at all.
Well, you were living 10 years too early.
Yeah.
Buck, wrap us up on spring, going into spring before I drop some questions on you guys. We've heard a lot, but the main thing I've taken away is straight toughness and physicality. And I think that's what's been missing the last 3 or 4 or 5 years collectively. And you see teams like NC State sort of live and die by that, at least that mantra, and they put it into effect against North Carolina. But Buck, close us on the 24 season before we get to questions.
I think it's it would be great if you could see a little bit of the UNC basketball team, and Taylor alluded to that earlier, rub off on this football team. Because North Carolina on the basketball court, really before this year, they weren't known as, necessarily the first on the floor kind of guys for a long time. And they have shown a level of toughness and a level of, combativeness that we've not seen out of the UNC basketball team in forever. And so it would be nice to see the North Carolina football team understand how that changes the equation, because there's no question that the difference between this UNC basketball team and others we've seen in the recent past is their toughness and their defense, and how they're willing to do whatever they need to do on the defensive end of the floor. So that would be good to see rub off on the football team. And you saw that light switch come on pretty quickly for the UNC basketball team. It's not something that has to take forever, to click. It could be something that gets adopted overnight. And, maybe on defense, that's something that Geoff Collins can bring out. And on offense, a lot of the guys on the offensive line are kind of hand-picked by Randy Clements, and this is this first year that's been that way. So a little bit more chippiness and combativeness, I think, would go a long way for this North Carolina football team.
Greg, I got a question for you. And Buck, I totally 100% agree there. The thing with the basketball team is it didn't start until they brought in somebody new. They brought in
and at that point, they only need two guys for the basketball team. They brought in Harrison Ingram, Cormac Ryan. Football, you have to bring in a lot more dogs to kind of level out the playing field.
So I want to bring a question into chat, and I think it's very relevant. WH1315, who's a regular here, and I'll read it for the folks on the audio version, and I'll read it for you guys that can't see it. Can you realistically expect that type of culture change if so much of your personnel on defense is the same? Certainly a relevant question, Greg.
Yeah, for sure. And that makes it a little bit more challenging. Hubert Davis had 7 guys lead the program last spring. And so he can bring in more guys to really, talking about half of his roster he turned over. So that helps when you can do that. But I go back to the 2015 year, and then Taylor knows about this. But the end of 2014 was a disaster. I was in the post-game press conference room where the players were interviewing, and a couple of them were taking shots at each other during the interviews. So you kind of understood how bad things had gotten. And I'm sitting here thinking, I don't know how this is going to change. And so Larry Fedora, he had a heart-to-heart with the whole team and had everybody, Taylor can probably give us more details here, but had everybody come in and air their grievances early in the offseason. And Larry Fedora and his staff took that seriously. It wasn't, just giving the guys time to speak. It was actually listening to them. And as Taylor mentioned earlier, the leadership of that 2015 team was impressive. And there's a lot of the same guys on the 2014 team as there was in 2015. So that culture change can happen. But there has to be something to spur it. And I think you start there by saying, hey, we got an issue. This is not how we want this program to play football. We have to stop being soft or stop not being as aggressive as we want to be. You have to define what the problem is, so then you can address it. And I don't know if the coaching staff has done that quite yet. Hopefully that's something that would occur in spring ball or leading up to spring ball. But that's how you have to approach it. And I think that's the only way it can potentially change is by addressing it head on.
Yeah, quick point about those meetings. Not only did we have a meeting where we could air out our grievances as a team, and it was all the players in there at once, Coach Fedora also set aside time to meet with every player one-on-one so we could tell him privately, hey, this is what I think you could do better as a coach. And I think that takes some courage as somebody to hear what people don't think you're doing that well, knowing hey, whatever feedback I get here, whether it's the star quarterback telling me or the 110th player on this roster, like I was as a 5th string wide receiver or whatever, everybody's voice matters. And one of the biggest things that I remember telling him and a lot of the players were telling him was our practices have to be so much more competitive, and we need to have that sense of competing on a day in, day out basis. And once we started to get that mindset, every rep matters, every rep is being tracked, and there's going to be consequences at the end if you lose those reps, that kind of started flipping the mindset for a lot of people to kind of have that game-like mentality. So by the time we got to the season, and there was a small hiccup in the South Carolina game where we kind of had that, oh no, we might stink again type mentality. But quickly had to put that aside, knowing all the work that we put in and all the changes that we made, and the change in the mentality. And I think a lot of that is on the players, but I think part of it too is on the coaches to understand what isn't going right, and being able to hold your players accountable when things aren't going right.
Yeah, and I wanted to shout out Gene Triplehorn's question too, with the transfers indicate a culture change after spring if a bunch. That's something we'll have to watch and see what happens. But I agree with you guys. I mean, it starts with the players, but the coaches also have to sort of institute it. I'm going to bring some questions in. Buck, I'm going to give you the first one here. Since we've kind of been here talking about this. This question's on the chat from Smoke Pants. Don't even want to know. What would you have to see in spring practice, Buck, to give you optimism heading into fall camp that this program will not be the same old as the last 4 or 5 years?
Well, one thing has already been alluded to here pretty, heavily, that if you start seeing guys getting chippy in practice, that's a sign that things are maybe moving in the right direction. I mean, Jason talking about at open practices, we have seen no real conflict as physically getting after one another after the whistle's blown, basically. So seeing some of that, I don't think you want, like a explosion of it, but seeing some of that would be a step in the right direction. So other than that, spring is one of those times where you always go into it feeling like you're going to see something that's really going to jump off the page for you and give you massive indication of what's to come. But that's generally not what happens during spring. Spring is a time mostly spent on working on fundamentals, and the other facets of the game come along more in fall camp in terms of what the team is actually going to look like. Now, not to say that spring practice is not instructive at all, but I think seeing some combativeness between the players would be a good sign.
Yes, sir. I'm going to bring in another question from the chat. And Jason, we're at 53 minutes, so we want to finish before 60 minutes. But I want to ask you this question, Jason. From Gridironman82, can a new analyst fix the special teams problems?
Well, it probably won't hurt, but I don't think it's just about the scheme exactly. I think the biggest thing is that the actual coaching on the field of what's happening with each unit has to be better. Analysts can help with that and can help, set, okay, we need to do these drills. We need to add, against this, we need to change this scheme or whatever. But there's only so much an analyst can really do on that front, especially on special teams. I do think they need to reevaluate which members of the coaching staff are doing which jobs on that front, and that can help. But yeah, it obviously needs to improve, but I'm not incredibly optimistic that change on its own is going to make that difference.
So there's a lot of other questions in the chat and on the message board. I want to just kind of point out there's a lot of questions about whether freshmen, how do the freshmen look? We'll get those answers as spring goes on. Jordan Louis, is there any legitimate reason to feel optimistic about the offensive line? We've talked about that a little bit. Culture change looked like preseason and all that. But Greg, I'm going to tee this one up, and I'm going to give it to you, and I'm going to let you close this show because I think this is a Greg Barnes question that if there ever was one, and you've already been in on it a little bit this time. Troy Vaughn on the message board, Tar Pit Premium message board. Assess Mack's 5 years back as a whole. You've got the floor to close us out here today. Going in, just so folks understand the schedule, Mack Brown press conference a week from today, 10 a.m. We will cover it fully. Inside Carolina, as they always do. And then spring practice begins on the 19th with media access on the 19th for however long they give us. So we're a week out, Greg. Mack Brown's 5 years back on the whole heading into 2024.
Yeah, it's a great question, Tommy. And I think if we had this conversation after the second year, when Carolina ends up in the Orange Bowl, even Mack said, "Hey, we're well ahead of schedule with how we've performed thus far." And then you kind of fall back to earth in 2021 and had good starts the last 2 years and just couldn't close. So I think there's an incomplete grade here. I think Mack has done a pretty good job increasing the talent level of the team. I think for whatever reason, this has been the biggest surprise for me. The defense just has not been good. We talked last year, if this defense could be top 50, Carolina could be playing in the ACC championship game. And if you look at FEI, they finished 77th. And that's after the great South Carolina game that Buck mentioned earlier that gave us all giddy feeling about, wait a minute, this is really a turnaround. And it wasn't. And when you look at what Mack did at Texas, and of course what he did his last couple of years in Chapel Hill in his 1.0 era, that's been the surprise. And so maybe Geoff Collins is that guy. So has he overperformed? No. Has he really underperformed? Probably not. But I do think we're at a point now where this program is his. He's been here 5 years. He has the staff he wants. The roster is completely his. You have to acknowledge that this is a changing time in college football with NIL and with the transfer portal. So those are hurdles that he's never had to deal with before. And so I think you have to give him a little bit of grace there. But because that runway is there, Carolina needs to show improvement. And I really think this is an opportunity this offseason. And we've talked about this before, but you don't have Drake Maye. So you really have to build a complete offense where you can't just rely on one guy. You've got a new defensive coordinator in. You've got some good pieces back. So you can really change the defense as you need. And this is the opportunity for a team that maybe is not going to win 10 games, but they could win 8 or 9 games and be very competitive and be a more complete team than what we've seen the last couple of years. And that'll win the fan base back. Now, at some point, you've got to excel and you've got to do better than 8 and 9 wins and get to 10 wins. So maybe that's not this year. Maybe that expectation is for next year. But I think Mack's done fine. I thought he would have more success at this point, but also thought it would take him longer to get going. So,
yeah, it's interesting how it works. North Carolina opens the 2024 season at Minnesota, but a lot to talk about, a lot to go through as spring practice opens, like I said, next week. Shout out to Congruity HR /Tar Heels. Get your free assessment for your small to mid-sized business. I saw somebody on the chat on the message board said, I can't wait to see what Congruity can do for my small to mid-sized business. Joke or not, they've made themselves a national brand, and they certainly can help you out and make your small to mid-sized business with customer service. And Greg, I've left you at the front. While I'm talking, I'll switch it out. Appreciate Greg Barnes, Buck Sanders, Jason Staples, and Taylor Vippolis joining me. It's always good to talk football. We'll talk a lot more as spring progresses. Shout out to Johnny T-Shirt and Congruity. Shout out to the couple hundred folks that have been here hanging out with us, and shout out to the regulars. Ton of content in Inside Carolina, be it basketball, football, baseball. If you listen to my stuff with Coach Forbes and Grace's articles, just a ton going on this time. Gentlemen, it's always a pleasure. Everybody stay safe. It's going to be pretty this week. I expect some golf handicaps to drop as we near spring practice. Thanks, guys.